They showed up at sunrise with paperwork, threats, and a deputy, confident they were about to humiliate me in front of the whole neighborhood. What they didn't know was that the water under their boots legally belonged to me. The knock never came. Instead, I watched through the fogged kitchen window as three silhouettes marched down my dock like they owned it. The mist hovered low over Cedar Hollow Lake, curling around the old planks the way it always does at dawn. Leading the charge was Linda Shoreline, the newly crowned HOA president, gripping a clipboard like a weapon. Two board members flanked her, and behind them walked a county deputy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Linda stopped at the edge of my dock and read from her paper loud enough for the loons to hear. "This vessel violates community standards. You have 72 hours to remove it or face daily fines." She didn't bother greeting me, didn't ask permission, just declared war. The vessel she was pointing at wasn't junk. It was my grandfather's old cabin cruiser, a steel blue workhorse he bought in the mid-'80s and kept running with patience and pride. I still use it every weekend, fishing, clearing storm debris, checking water levels. It smells like diesel, sun-warmed wood, and memories you can't put a price on. I'm Ethan Caldwell, 51, retired Marine Systems engineer. I moved back here after my grandfather passed to the same lakeside cabin he built by hand decades ago. Back then, Cedar Hollow was quiet. No gates, no boards, no committees telling you what color your mailbox could be. Just families who minded their business and helped when storms knocked docks loose. That all changed when Linda arrived 3 years ago with her luxury SUV, designer sunglasses, and a vision for upgrading the community. The first time we spoke, she stood in my gravel driveway, pointed at the boat, and called it an eyesore. I showed her the registration, the dock permits, the county surveys, all legal, all filed long before she ever learned this lake existed. She waved it off. "Community standards override old paperwork," she said, smiling like that settled it. Over the next few months, letters started going out. Fines, warnings, aesthetic violations. Longtime residents were suddenly problems. Gardens were non-compliant. Kids' swings were liabilities. My boat was just the easiest target. The notice Linda held that morning demanded removal or $500 a day in penalties. She looked proud, like she'd finally won. What she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that my grandfather hadn't just bought a cabin by the water. He'd bought something far more valuable. And by threatening that boat, Linda had stepped onto ground she didn't legally have the right to stand on. Because the moment she mentioned enforcement, I remembered a document buried in an old file drawer. And that's when everything changed. That document wasn't just old paperwork. It was the kind of forgotten truth that can flip power upside down when the wrong person pushes too hard. After Linda and her entourage left my dock, I didn't chase them. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten legal action like she probably expected. I went inside, poured coffee, and opened the cedar chest my grandfather built the year I was born. Inside were fishing maps, faded photos, and a stack of manila folders that smelled like dust and time. That's where the deed lived. I'd seen it before, years ago, but never had a reason to truly study it. Back then, Cedar Hollow Lake was just home. No one questioned who owned what. People respected boundaries without signs or fines. But as I reread those pages, my pulse slowed in that familiar way it used to before diagnosing a system failure offshore. Calm focus, pattern recognition. My grandfather, Walter Caldwell, didn't just buy lakefront property in 1984. He purchased all water rights and the submerged land south of the natural ridge line that cuts through Cedar Hollow. Back then, surveyors used physical landmarks, not satellites. That ridge split the lake into two legally distinct bodies of water, something modern homeowners never bothered to research. The HOA's jurisdiction. It only covered the northern basin. The boat Linda wanted gone sat firmly in the southern one. That afternoon, I drove into town and visited the county record's office. The clerk looked mildly surprised anyone wanted documents older than most of the filing cabinets. It took 2 hours, 3 signatures, and a basement trip that smelled like mildew and regret. But when the survey maps were unrolled on the table, everything aligned. My grandfather hadn't bought a view. He'd bought the lake bed. Meanwhile, Linda was escalating. By the end of the week, I had 3 certified letters taped to my door. Fines, warnings, a notice of imminent enforcement. She'd also scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Thursday night, timed perfectly when most working residents wouldn't attend. I showed up anyway, still in my work clothes, hands stained with grease from helping a neighbor fix a dock cable. Linda stood at the front with a slideshow titled Community Beautification Initiative. Her proposal included inspection fees, annual lake access charges, and restoration requirements that would quietly force older families out. When she asked if there were questions, I raised my hand. Her smile tightened. Yes, Ethan, can you clarify how the HOA plans to regulate watercraft on privately owned water? The room went silent. Linda laughed once, sharp and rehearsed. All lake usage falls under HOA authority. I slid copies of the survey across the table. Not this part. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently. I watched color drain from her face as she flipped through pages she'd never bothered to look up. She didn't back down, she pivoted. Suddenly, I wasn't a homeowner with documents, I was a hostile presence. A concern, someone whose background made people uncomfortable. I left the meeting knowing one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop. And when someone like Linda doubles down instead of admitting she's wrong, the next move is never legal. It's personal. The moment facts stopped working on her, Linda switched tactics. And that's when I realized this was no longer about rules, but control. By the following Monday, Cedar Hollow felt different, quiet in a tense way. Conversations stopped when I walked into the general store. A neighbor who used to wave suddenly found his phone fascinating. Linda hadn't just ignored the documents. I could feel her rewriting the story. It started with rumors. Concerns, she called them, that I'd been aggressive at the meeting, that I'd intimidated board members, that my technical background and years working offshore made people uneasy. Carefully chosen words, repeated often enough, start to feel like truth to people who don't bother checking. Then came the patrols. 2 men in matching polo shirts began circling the lake in a sleek aluminum boat, taking photos of docks and writing notes. They hovered near my shoreline longer than anyone else's. One afternoon, I counted them idling 27 minutes within a stone's throw of my dock. They waved when I stared back like this was friendly oversight. It wasn't. Bright orange signs appeared overnight near common access points. Unauthorized watercraft prohibited. No agency seals. No statute numbers, just confidence printed in bold letters. Linda was betting on ignorance, and usually that bet pays off. I drove back to the records office, this time with purpose. I requested the original lake survey overlays and easement filings tied to the access road that ran past my cabin. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You're digging deep," she said. "Someone has to," I replied. That's when I found the second landmine. The only maintained road leading to the southern basin crossed a strip of land included in my grandfather's purchase. A narrow, overlooked easement that granted passage, but not commercial use, development, or restricted access enforcement. Meaning any plan Linda had involving construction, private security, or future development couldn't legally function without my written permission. That explained the pressure. 2 days later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly past my driveway, then again that evening, and again the next morning. No lights, no stops, just presence. Linda had filed a complaint, claimed she felt unsafe. I got the call that afternoon. A polite deputy asked if I'd be willing to keep interactions minimal to avoid escalation. Translation: stay quiet while the narrative hardens. I didn't argue, I documented every letter, every sign, every patrol pass, time-stamped photos, GPS tags, audio recordings of conversations I was legally allowed to record. I wasn't angry, I was methodical. That night, as I reviewed documents at the kitchen table, I noticed something odd. The patrol boat's wake had left a faint rainbow sheen near the reeds. I crouched down and smelled it. Fuel, not from my boat, from theirs. The irony almost made me laugh. Linda wanted control over water she didn't own. And in trying to prove authority, she'd started breaking rules far bigger than HOA bylaws. Because the moment environmental laws enter the picture, power shifts fast, and Linda had no idea what she just triggered. The instant fuel hit the water, this stopped being a neighborhood dispute and turned into something that could ruin lives. I didn't confront Linda. I didn't call the patrol boat out. I knelt at the shoreline like I was tying a knot and took photos instead. Close ones, wide ones. The faint sheen spreading across reeds that had never known contamination. Then I collected a water sample the same way we did offshore. Clean container, sealed, labeled, time-stamped. That night I made 2 calls. The first was to an environmental attorney recommended through a retired engineers network. The second was to a state environmental hotline that handles anonymous reports. I didn't accuse anyone. I just described what I observed and where. Within 48 hours, Cedar Hollow was crawling with quiet tension. The patrol boat disappeared. The signs stayed up, but no one enforced them. Linda stopped waving from her porch when she saw me. Instead, she escalated again, this time with paper. A certified letter arrived claiming I owed accumulated fines totaling $6,000. The notice referenced violations on community-controlled waters. That wording mattered. It told me she still hadn't checked the deeds. Then came the restraining order. A process server showed up on a Saturday afternoon while my sister and her kids were visiting. According to the paperwork, I'd threatened Linda during the HOA meeting. No witnesses listed. No specifics. Just a request that I remain 500 feet away from her and any community functions. Public embarrassment disguised as legal protection. I watched my nephew's face as the server spoke. Confused, nervous. That's when anger tried to creep in, but I pushed it down. Anger clouds timelines. Documentation wins cases. I added the order to the file. By now, my kitchen table looked like an investigation board. Maps, letters, screenshots, water test results, and right on top, a copy of the lake deed with the southern basin clearly outlined. What Linda didn't realize was that filing false complaints creates patterns. And patterns are easy for authorities to recognize once someone starts paying attention. 2 days later, I received a call from a woman who introduced herself as an environmental compliance officer. Calm voice, direct questions. She asked if I'd noticed any recent changes in lake activity. I told her everything, slowly, fact by fact. That same evening, unmarked vehicles began parking near the access road. Not patrol cars, something quieter, observational. Linda must have sensed the shift because her behavior became erratic. She posted long messages online about dangerous individuals. She warned neighbors to stay alert. She framed herself as protector and me as threat. But fear-based stories crumble when facts arrive with clipboards. Standing on my dock that night, I watched the water move the way it always had, steady, indifferent to human schemes. Linda thought she was tightening a net. In reality, she'd walked straight into one. And the moment authorities start asking questions, desperation replaces confidence, and desperate people make catastrophic mistakes. When people realize control is slipping, they don't retreat, they rush, and rushing is how secrets surface. Linda rushed. The following week, Cedar Hollow woke up to change overnight. Temporary surveillance cameras appeared on light poles facing the southern shoreline. Not discreet ones either. Cheap, obvious, installed crooked like intimidation was the real purpose. Flyers were taped to mailboxes warning residents to report suspicious behavior. My name wasn't on them, but it didn't need to be. I documented everything. The environmental officer returned, this time with equipment. She worked quietly, professional, uninterested in neighborhood drama. Her test strips changed color fast. She didn't react outwardly, but she asked pointed questions about the patrol boat's operating schedule and fuel storage. That same afternoon, my attorney called. She explained something Linda clearly never bothered to research. Water rights here follow priority, not popularity. The first legally recorded owner with beneficial use has superior rights over anyone who comes later, HOA or not. And because my grandfather's filings predated every surrounding deed, authority flowed one direction, toward me. Meanwhile, Linda made a move that told me panic had set in. A man I'd never seen before knocked on my door offering cash, quiet, quick, generous, if I'd consider relocating the boat permanently. No paperwork, no name card, just a number scribbled on a sticky note. I declined. 2 days later, my mailbox was smashed. The next morning, my boat wouldn't start. A mechanic confirmed contamination in the fuel system, deliberate, expensive, documented. That crossed a line. I filed a police report and added the repair invoice to the growing file. By now, the narrative Linda was pushing had inverted. The unsafe resident wasn't causing problems, he was absorbing them. Neighbors started whispering again, but this time the tone had shifted. People noticed the cameras, the patrols, the fines. They asked why enforcement only targeted certain homes. Questions spread faster than fear when money and property are involved. Then the environmental notice arrived. Not for me, for unauthorized activity on protected waters. Linda's committee had unknowingly violated multiple regulations by operating patrol boats, installing signage, and disturbing shoreline habitats without permits. The fines weren't small, and they stacked daily. That's when she called an emergency meeting, not a vote, a clarification session. I showed up with my attorney this time. Linda tried to control the room, talked fast, dismissed concerns, framed everything as misunderstanding. But when the environmental officer stood up and explained the violations, the air went still. The authority Linda had relied on evaporated in real time. She didn't look at me once. As the meeting ended, she brushed past, whispering something sharp under her breath. I didn't catch the words, but I caught the intent. She wasn't finished. Because when someone's scheme starts collapsing publicly, the final move is never legal, it's reckless. The night everything broke open didn't start with shouting. It started at 3:12 a.m., under darkness thick enough to hide bad decisions. I was awake because sleep had become optional lately. That's when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the new cameras I'd installed along the dock. Legal, visible, and pointed only at my property. 3 figures moved near the shoreline, low and hurried. One carried a container. Another scanned the road like a lookout. I watched, silent, as they poured something into the water. By morning, the footage had already been duplicated and backed up. Faces, movements, license plates. Clear enough that there was no mistaking who stood there under the floodlights. Linda Shoreline was one of them. She'd crossed from intimidation into criminal. I sent the footage to my attorney and the environmental compliance officer before the sun cleared the trees. By noon, unmarked trucks returned to Cedar Hollow, this time with agency markings. Testing kits, evidence bags, serious people asking serious questions. Linda tried to get ahead of it. She filed a report accusing me of dumping fuel. Claimed my deteriorating boat was leaking toxins into shared water. It might have worked on paper if the chemical signatures hadn't told a different story. Automotive oil. Fresh. Nowhere near my fuel type. The investigator didn't argue, she documented. That afternoon, a collection agency called about HOA fines. I told them to hold. An hour later, they called back apologizing. Apparently, someone had attempted to place a lien on my property using HOA authority that didn't legally exist. That kind of mistake doesn't disappear quietly. It attracts attention. Neighbors began showing up unannounced. Quiet apologies, questions, one brought coffee, another brought copies of emails Linda had sent pushing for compliance. Patterns emerged, pressure, threats, offers. She wasn't managing a community, she was running a playbook. By the end of the week, local reporters started calling. Environmental violations, harassment claims, a veteran being targeted over land use. I didn't seek attention, but I didn't hide facts either. Facts speak louder when they're finally heard. Linda's online posts turned frantic. Caps lock, accusations, claims of conspiracies. She named me directly this time, and that was a mistake. Defamation is easy to prove when everything is time-stamped. Then came the call from my attorney that shifted everything. She discovered Linda wasn't just an HOA president. She was a developer. And Cedar Hollow wasn't a home to her, it was a stalled project. Suddenly, the pressure made sense. The fines, the patrols, the urgency, my boat wasn't an eyesore, it was proof. Proof that original water rights still existed. Proof that control wasn't hers. Proof that something far bigger couldn't move forward as long as I stayed put. Standing on the dock that evening, watching officials mark reminders into the shoreline, I understood something clearly. This had never been about rules. It was about removing obstacles. And once I realized what she was truly trying to build, and what stood in her way, the end stopped being uncertain. The moment I understood what she was trying to build, everything clicked, and so did the timeline she was racing against. My attorney laid it out calmly, like delivering bad weather reports. Linda's company had preliminary purchase agreements lined up with several newer homeowners, contingent on community improvements. A private marina, restricted lake access, luxury redevelopment disguised as beautification. Every delay cost her money. Every old deed standing in the way threatened the entire plan. And my property, it sat directly in the middle of it. The access road, the southern basin, the proof that original water rights were still active. My boat wasn't ugly, it was inconvenient. As long as I used the lake openly, her narrative about exclusive control fell apart. That's why the pressure had escalated so fast. By now, agencies were comparing notes. Environmental regulators talked to county clerks. Clerks talked to investigators. Investigators talked to lawyers. And lawyers, unlike HOA boards, don't bluff when the paperwork is solid. Linda made one last aggressive move. She scheduled another emergency community meeting, framing it as a final resolution. Flyers promised safety, stability, and closure. What they didn't mention was the stack of falsified reports she planned to present. Photoshopped images, selective data, and a story she hoped would drown out the truth. I came prepared, so did everyone else. The room was packed beyond capacity. Neighbors, officials, a few quiet observers who didn't introduce themselves but took notes anyway. Linda stood at the front, confident in that brittle way people get when they've already lost but don't know it yet. She started strong, slides, talking points, rehearsed concern. Then she claimed my boat had caused environmental damage. That was my cue. I stood and calmly asked one question. Can you confirm the HOA's legal jurisdiction over the southern basin? She froze. I connected my laptop and projected the deed, the survey overlays, and the environmental notices, one after another. Dates, signatures, coordinates, no commentary, just facts. Murmurs spread, then voices, then silence again as the implications settled in. Linda tried to interrupt, tried to reframe, tried to dismiss it as technical confusion. That's when an investigator stood up. He identified himself and stated plainly that there was an active inquiry into environmental dumping, fraudulent liens, and misuse of authority tied to the HOA's actions. Names were mentioned, dates cited, consequences implied without being spelled out. Linda's posture collapsed. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She gathered her papers with shaking hands and left the room without looking back. Outside, the lake was still, calm, unbothered by human ambition. I stayed behind, answering questions, explaining rights, offering copies of documents to anyone who wanted them. For the first time in months, people listened. Because when someone walks away that quietly after fighting that hard, it means the real consequences are just beginning. She walked out quietly, but the fallout that followed was anything but. Within 48 hours, everything unraveled at once. Linda's online profiles went dark. The HOA website quietly removed her name. Emails that once came daily stopped entirely. Silence can be loud when you know what it means. Then the notices started appearing, this time on her door. State investigators requested records. Environmental officials issued formal citations. A lien she'd tried to place was flagged as fraudulent, triggering an automatic review of every financial action tied to the HOA since her appointment. When authorities pull one thread, they don't stop until the sweater is gone. Neighbors began comparing stories. Offers to buy, threats disguised as warnings, pressure timed around holidays or absences. Patterns emerged that were impossible to ignore once people finally talked to each other. One afternoon, a woman from 3 houses down knocked on my door holding a folder. Inside were emails Linda had sent urging her to sell quickly before standards change. Another neighbor brought text messages promising leniency if he voted a certain way. None of it looked illegal at first glance, but together it painted intent. That's what investigators look for. The environmental case moved fastest. Water testing confirmed multiple dumping incidents tied to non-permitted patrol activity. Fines stacked quickly, daily, relentlessly. Each violation multiplied the next. The lake Linda wanted to control had become the evidence that buried her. Then the development angle surfaced publicly. A local reporter ran the story. Careful, factual, devastating. It outlined how a private company had attempted to manipulate a small community through HOA authority to clear obstacles for future construction. The article didn't need to exaggerate. The documents spoke for themselves. That's when the investors vanished. Projects don't survive scrutiny without trust, and Linda's plan required blind confidence. Once doubt entered the room, the money fled. Contracts dissolved, partnerships froze. What had once been momentum became liability. The restraining order quietly expired and was never renewed. The patrol boats were hauled away. The signs came down. One morning I stood on the dock watching the sun hit the water the way it always had, and for the first time in months nothing felt tense. No engines, No clipboards, just ripples and wind. Later that week, I received a formal letter acknowledging my ownership rights and confirming no HOA authority applied to the Southern Basin. Clear, final, unambiguous. Linda never contacted me again. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just restored the boat, fixed the dock, and let the lake be what it had always been, a place that didn't belong to power, money, or ambition. It belonged to whoever respected it. But the final chapter wasn't about her downfall. It was about what protecting one small piece of land ended up changing forever. I thought the story ended when the pressure stopped, but protecting one piece of water set off consequences none of us expected. 6 months later, Cedar Hollow doesn't look the same, and that's a good thing. Not because it was modernized or polished, but because it finally slowed down. Meetings are smaller now, quieter. The new HOA board, made up of longtime residents and a few newer ones who learned hard lessons, operates with one guiding rule. Authority starts with legality, not ego. The lake is cleaner, too. Environmental officials completed their follow-up testing and confirmed full recovery. The Southern Basin was quietly designated as a protected watershed, limiting any future commercial activity permanently. No marinas, no resorts, no exclusive access, just water, wildlife, and people who treat both with respect. I used the settlement funds from the civil case to do something my grandfather would have approved of. The cabin was restored, not upgraded. Same structure, same layout, just stabilized and preserved. His old boat, once labeled an eyesore, now sits freshly painted, fully functional, and unmistakably proud. Kids point at it when they paddle past. Parents tell stories about the boat that saved the lake. I didn't plan that symbolism, but I don't reject it either. Word spread beyond Cedar Hollow. Other communities started calling. People dealing with similar pressure, similar tactics. I now spend part of my time helping homeowners understand their property rights before problems escalate. Knowledge is preventative medicine. Most bullies back down once they realize someone is paying attention. As for Linda Shoreline, she faded fast. Her company dissolved under legal costs and regulatory penalties. Her professional licenses were suspended pending review. The development never happened. The lake she tried to control outlived her ambition without even noticing. That's the thing about land and water. They don't care who wants them most. They respond to patience, history, and law. Some mornings I sit on the dock before sunrise, coffee in hand, watching mist rise the same way it did decades ago. The lake hasn't changed. The planks still creak. The water still laps gently against the shore I legally protect, not to exclude others, but to keep it honest. What started as a threat became a reminder. You don't always win by fighting louder. Sometimes you win by standing still, knowing exactly where you stand. And the next time someone mistakes silence for weakness, this lake will be ready to teach the lesson all over again. What still amazes me isn't how far one person went for control. It's how close she came to getting away with it simply because no one checked the paperwork. Today, Cedar Hollow Lake is quiet again. Not the forced quiet of fear or surveillance, but the natural kind. The kind that existed long before committees, fines, or manufactured authority ever showed up. The water reflects the sky the same way it always has, indifferent to human ambition and immune to intimidation. Looking back, the warning signs were always there. Sudden rules, urgent deadlines, pressure disguised as community standards. When power moves faster than logic, it's usually because someone is racing against the truth. Linda didn't lose because she was loud or arrogant. She lost because she underestimated history. My grandfather never imagined this fight. He didn't buy the lake to control others or to profit from it. He bought it because he understood something simple. If you protect what you love properly, it can't be taken from you later. That lesson outlived him and saved far more than a boat. The HOA still exists, but it no longer governs through fear. Every decision is documented. Every rule is verified. People ask questions now, and that alone changed everything. When communities stop assuming authority is legitimate and start demanding proof, abuse collapses fast. The boat still runs every weekend. Sometimes I fish. Sometimes I just idle across the water and listen. Kids wave from kayaks, neighbors smile again, no patrols, no threats, no clipboards pretending to be law. And every time I hear someone say, "It's easier to just comply," I remember how close this place came to being stripped, fenced, and sold off piece by piece. Easier doesn't mean right. If there's one takeaway from all this, it's this: never assume someone else understands your rights better than you do. Whether it's land, water, or your own peace of mind, ownership only matters if you're willing to defend it with knowledge. Because sometimes, the quietest documents hold the loudest power. And if this story proves anything, it's that standing your ground doesn't always require shouting, just knowing exactly where the line is drawn. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Like the video, comment your thoughts, and tell us, have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.